Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Oklo Natural Nuclear Reactors. In June of 1972, in a quiet French laboratory, a technician looked at a reading and assumed the machine was broken. He was testing uranium from a mine in Africa, and part of it was simply missing. Not the metal, the specific kind of atom that makes uranium dangerous. Here is what made that terrifying. Natural uranium is the same everywhere. On Earth, on the Moon, inside meteorites, the fissile form called uranium-235 always makes up about 0.72% of the whole. It is one of the most reliable numbers in all of chemistry. But the sample from the Oklo mine, in the Franceville Basin of southeastern Gabon, read as low as 0.6%. Across the deposit, roughly 200 kilograms of uranium-235 had vanished. Only one process in the universe removes that atom selectively: nuclear fission. Something had been burning uranium as fuel, and that something was the ground itself. The team, working under the physicist Francis Perrin, followed the evidence to a conclusion that sounds like a hoax. About 1.7 billion years ago, this ore body had operated as a nuclear reactor. A real one. 16 separate reactor zones, running on their own, with no human anywhere on the planet to build them. It was possible for a strange reason. Uranium-235 decays faster than the common form, so if you rewind almost 2 billion years, natural uranium was about 3% enriched. That is close to the fuel we load into modern power plants today. The desert had reactor-grade uranium lying in the rock, entirely by accident of time. It still needed one more ingredient. Groundwater soaked into the porous sandstone and acted as a moderator, slowing the neutrons down just enough to keep a chain reaction going. And then the system did something no engineer would believe. It regulated itself. When the reaction heated up, the water boiled away, and without the water, the fission stopped. When the rock cooled and water seeped back in, the reaction switched on again. Analysis of trapped xenon gas by the scientist Alex Meshik later suggested a rhythm, roughly 30 minutes of activity, then more than 2 hours of rest, over and over. These zones ran on and off for a few 100,000 years, at a gentle output of tens of kilowatts. The proof is locked in the leftover isotopes. Elements like neodymium and ruthenium at Oklo match the fingerprint of reactor waste, not ordinary rock. There was even a prophet. A chemist named Paul Kuroda predicted in 1956 that a natural reactor could exist under the right conditions. 16 years later, Oklo proved him right. Consider the deepest twist. Life made this possible. Oxygen from early microbes changed the chemistry of the planet and let uranium concentrate in sediments in the first place. And it can never happen again. That fuel has decayed away, too dilute now to ever ignite. Oklo is the only place the Earth ever ran a reactor by itself, and it did it before complex life even existed. If a rock can do the unbelievable, so can the things our ancestors left behind. Number 2. The Makapansgat Pebble. Picture a small ape man walking through a South African valley 3 million years ago, who stops, picks up a reddish stone, and carries it home for no reason anyone can eat or use. The stone had a face. The object is a water-worn cobble of reddish jasperite, about the size of a fist, weighing around 260 grams. It was found in the 1920s in the Makapansgat Valley, in what is now Limpopo Province, inside a limestone cave. And it was lying among the bones of Australopithecus africanus, a human ancestor that lived roughly 2.5 to 3 million years ago. The face is real, and it is entirely natural. Weathering and mineral pits on the surface line up into 2 eyes and a mouth. Turn it over, and there is a second face on the back. Nobody carved it. There are no tool marks at all, and that is exactly what makes it strange, because this pebble had no natural way to get into that cave. The nearest source of this kind of jasperite is somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers away. Water did not carry it there. Animals did not carry it there. The most reasonable explanation left is that an Australopithecine picked it up and brought it home, across a distance of many kilometers, because something about it caught the eye. Scientists call an object like this a manuport, not a tool, not art, just a thing that a hominin chose to move. Raymond Dart, the same anatomist who identified the famous Taung child, recognized how important it might be. The researcher Robert Bednarik has spent years arguing it is early evidence of pattern recognition. What it may capture is a trick of the brain called pareidolia. That is the wiring that makes you see a face in a cloud or an electrical socket. If this pebble was collected because it looked like a face, then that instinct is at least 3 million years old, older than our entire genus by 500,000 years. Now be honest about the debate. Skeptics point out that keeping an interesting rock does not prove symbolic thought. It might just prove curiosity. There is no campsite full of collected objects, just this one stone. But even the cautious reading is remarkable. Before controlled fire, before language, before anything we would call human, something looked at a rock and saw a face looking back. That reddish color may matter too. It foreshadows a fascination with red that runs through hundreds of thousands of years of later human behavior, from ochre body paint to red burials. The deep root of every image we have ever made might begin with a pre-human hand closing around a face in the dirt. And the next find shows what happens when a hominin does not just carry a face, but builds in the dark. Number 3. The Bruniquel Cave Neanderthal Rings. Go more than 300 meters into a cave in southern France, far past the last daylight, and there, by the glow of ancient fire, a stocky figure sets a broken piece of stone into a growing circle on the floor. That was 176,000 years ago. Bruniquel Cave sits in the Aveyron Valley of southwestern France. A rockfall sealed it for tens of thousands of years, until 1990, when a teenage caver named Bruno Kowalczewski dug through the debris, blocking the entrance. What his group eventually found, about 336 meters inside, was not natural. Someone had broken hundreds of stalagmites into pieces of roughly equal length and arranged them into structures. There are around 400 of these fragments. Laid end to end, they stretch about 112 meters, and together they weigh over 2 tons. They form 2 rough rings, the larger one about 6.5 meters across, along with smaller stacked piles. For years, the age was a mystery, because radiocarbon dating could only say the material was older than 47,000 years, which is where that method runs out. The breakthrough came from uranium series dating of the calcite that had regrown over the broken stalagmites. In a study published in the journal Nature in 2016, led by Jacques Joubert and Sophie Verheiden, the answer came back at about 176,500 years. That date changes everything. At that time, there were no modern humans in Europe at all. The only people here were Neanderthals. So Neanderthals built this. And they did not just build it. They lit it. Investigators found burnt bone and reddened, blackened tops on some of the stalagmites, proof that fire was carried deep underground and used for light and heat. To construct something this far into a cave, you need controlled fire, planning, and a group of people working together in a place with no sunlight, no easy air, and no room for error. Nobody knows what it was for. There is no household garbage, no sign anyone lived here, so it was not a shelter in the ordinary sense. It might have been a ritual space. It might have served some purpose we cannot recover. What we can say is that it is one of the oldest constructions made by any member of the human family, and it predates the earliest cave paintings by more than 100,000 years. The cave's stable, lightless conditions preserved the arrangement almost perfectly for 176 millennia. Access is now tightly controlled, and much of the study relies on 3-dimensional mapping. The lesson is hard to overstate. More than 100,000 years before our species painted a single wall, another kind of human was already organizing stone and fire in the deep earth. We were never the first minds to shape the world. And if they could build, the question becomes whether an even older ancestor could carve. Number 4. The Berekhat Ram Figurine. In 1981, an archaeologist's trowel scraped away sediment on the Golan Heights and exposed a small reddish pebble wedged between two ancient lava flows. Some people think it is a sculpture of a woman. If they are right, it may be 250,000 years old. The object is tiny, a tough pebble about 3.5 centimeters long, a reddish-yellow color. It was found by the archaeologist Nama Goran Inbar at a site called Berekhat Ram. The two basalt lava flows that sandwiched it can be dated by the Argon method, and they bracket its age. It is older than about 230,000 years, and younger than about 700,000 years. It belongs to the Acheulean period, which means the maker was Homo erectus, or another archaic human, long before our own species existed. Here's the claim. The pebble already had a vaguely human shape, but there are grooves on it. A curving groove for a neck, and marks that could define arms. The argument is that a hominin looked at a suggestive stone and worked it deliberately into a female figure. This is not a fringe idea. Alexander Marshak, a researcher at Harvard, studied the grooves under a microscope and concluded they were made by a stone tool, not by natural weathering. Later, Francesco D'Errico and April Nowell carried out their own independent microscopic study and also found signs of deliberate carving. If they are correct, this is among the oldest candidate artworks anywhere on Earth. Of course, it is contested, and it should be. Skeptics argue the grooves could be natural, or could even be accidental scratches from the excavation. Because there is no pigment and no clear face, the entire case rests on those neck and shoulder lines. Its closest cousin is the Tan figurine from Morocco, another tiny, ancient, hotly debated object. That debate is actually valuable, because it forces scientists to define exactly what counts as art. A single stone cannot prove that archaic humans had symbolic minds. But this one keeps getting cited, decade after decade, because it will not sit quietly inside the old story. And the old story was tidy. For a long time, textbooks placed the birth of art at around 40,000 years ago, in the painted caves of Europe, as if a switch flipped in the modern human brain. The Makapansgat Pebble hinted that seeing a figure came first. Berekhat Ram hints that helping the figure along, actually shaping it, might be 250,000 years older than us. If a pre-human hand really did carve this, then the urge to make an image of ourselves is far older than ourselves. And what if the mark was not a figure at all, but a pattern, far away to the east? Number 5. The Baigong Pipes of China. On a barren plateau in western China, investigators climbed into a cave in a lonely mountain and found rusted tubes running straight through solid rock, marching out of the hillside and down into a salt lake. They looked manufactured. They looked like plumbing. And nobody was supposed to have built plumbing here. The site sits near Mount Baigong, about 40 kilometers southwest of the city of Dalinga, in Qinghai province, on the High Kaidam Basin. The pipe-like structures range from a few centimeters to about 40 centimeters across. Some run vertically through the stone, others lie along the shore, and even the bed of nearby Tosan Lake. The story exploded around 2002, when Chinese state media reported on the pipes, and fringe outlets immediately branded them the work of aliens, an ancient installation impossibly out of place. Early chemical analysis reported that the pipes are mostly iron oxide, ordinary rust, mixed with silica and calcium oxide, plus a small fraction that the first reports could not identify. That unidentified sliver was enough to launch 1,000 theories. But the honest question here is not who built them. It is why they look built at all. And that is where the researchers and the headline writers part ways. The mainstream explanation is almost as strange as the myth, just true. The tubes appear to be fossilized tree root casts, or mineral pipe formations, made when iron-rich groundwater cemented sediment around ancient roots or water channels. A study in 2003 proposed exactly this: roots that were slowly mineralized by iron and sulfur-bearing water. The Qaidam Basin was once far warmer and wetter than the harsh desert it is today, wet enough to support the plants whose roots left these hollows. Some of the pipes reportedly still contain plant material and show ring-like internal patterns, just what you would expect from a root. The lake itself supports the natural reading. Its water is intensely salty and rich in iron, exactly the chemistry that builds rusty mineral tubes and stains them that oxidized red. And there is a simpler point that deflates the manufactured claim entirely. There are no tools here, no artifacts, no settlement, no workshop, no maker of any kind. A civilization capable of metal pipes leaves more than pipes. This site sits at over 3,000 meters in a remote, punishing landscape, and comparable pipe structures show up in other parts of the world, including the American Southwest. So the Baigong pipes are not a hoax, and they are not aliens. They are a genuine geological curiosity that the Earth already explained, wrapped in a legend the modern mind could not resist. Chinese authorities even placed a monument nearby, and tourists come to see the mystery. That is why they matter. They are a live demonstration of how easily we manufacture a puzzle out of something the planet solved on its own. But sometimes the marks really were deliberate and unimaginably old. Number 6. The Trinil engraved shell. In a museum drawer in the Netherlands, a researcher tilted an old fossil shell toward the light, and a pattern that had been invisible for 120 years suddenly leapt out. A zigzag, a deliberate one, cut by a hand that was not human. The shell is from a freshwater mussel, collected at Trinil on the Solo River in Java, Indonesia. And Trinil is a legendary place. It is where the anatomist Eugène Dubois discovered Java Man, the first known fossils of Homo erectus, back in 1891. The shells came from his original excavation, and they had been sitting in the Naturalis Museum in Leiden ever since, unexamined for over a century. One specimen carried a clear geometric engraving, a zigzag, almost an M shape, scratched into the surface. When a team led by Josephine Jordans published their study in the journal Nature in 2014, the dating stunned people. The shell is somewhere between 430,000 and 540,000 years old. That makes the engraving the oldest known deliberate geometric marking on Earth by an enormous margin. And the maker was Homo erectus, a species long dismissed as too primitive for anything like abstract thought. The evidence that it is deliberate is careful. Under the microscope, the grooves were made in one continuous motion across a fresh shell, with no sign of any natural cause. When researchers tried to reproduce it, a shark tooth or similar sharp point cut identical lines. Other shells in the same collection tell a supporting story. Several have precise holes punched at exactly the spot needed to cut the muscle that holds a muscle shut, which means Homo erectus was opening these shells with real manual skill, and some shells were even sharpened into tools. The dating relied on argon-argon methods and luminescence on the sediments that held the shells, and the result rewrote a chapter of prehistory. Before this, the oldest geometric engraving was the marked ochre from Blombos Cave in South Africa, around 100,000 years old. Trinil pushed that origin back 4 or 5 times further. The strangest part is how long it hid. The marks are faint. They only show up under raking light and magnification, which is why they went unnoticed for 120 years, until a co-author named Stephen Monroe spotted the pattern in photographs while working on his doctorate. Scientists still debate what the zigzag meant. It could be decoration. It could be idle marking. It could be something symbolic we cannot decode. But the behavioral picture is hard to dismiss. Opening shells for food may have trained the very hand that later dragged a point across one on purpose. A species we filed under primitive left a pattern with no function except to exist. It is the oldest hint that making marks is older than being human. And if Erectus could work a shell, the question is who worked stone before anyone was human at all. Number 7. The Lomekwi 3-stone tools. In 2011, a research team took a wrong turn near Lake Turkana in Kenya and walked straight up onto a scatter of stones that, by every rule of the textbooks, should not have existed. They were tools, and they were older than the human genus itself. The site is called Lomekwi 3 in the Nachukui Formation of northern Kenya. The team, led by Sonia Harmond and Jason Lewis, had been looking for a different fossil locality when they got lost and stumbled onto this one. When they published in the journal Nature in May of 2015, the date they reported was 3.3 million years ago. To understand why that number is explosive, you need the old record. The previously oldest known stone tools were the Oldowan tools from Gona in Ethiopia, about 2.6 million years old. Lomekwi beat that by around 700,000 years in a single announcement. But the deeper shock is about who made them. The earliest fossils of our own genus, Homo, are about 2.8 million years old. Lomekwi is 500,000 years older than that. So the toolmaker was not Homo. It was something else. The leading candidates are Australopithecus afarensis, the species of the famous fossil Lucy, or Kenyanthropus plateops, whose remains were found nearby by Meev Leakey's team in 1999. The assemblage is substantial, about 149 stone artifacts, including cores, sharp flakes, anvils, and hammerstones. Some are big. One core weighs around 15 kilograms, and the technique is distinct from the later Oldowan, cruder, using methods where the stone is struck against a stationary anvil. Researchers named this new, older technology the Lomekwian. Now the obvious challenge is proving these are real tools, not rocks that broke by accident. This is a genuine scientific fight, and the team answered it in a beautiful way. They refit flakes back onto the cores they came from, like reassembling a jigsaw puzzle of stone. A rock that shatters by chance does not do that. The percussion marks, the impact points, the negative scars where flakes were driven off, all pointed to deliberate, skilled napping. The dating came from magnetostratigraphy and argon-argon dating of the volcanic layers above and below. There had already been a hint. In 2010, cut-marked animal bones from Dikika in Ethiopia, about 3.39 million years old, suggested tool use before Homo. Lomekwi confirmed the toolmaker in stone. The tools were large and blunt, better for pounding than fine cutting, perhaps for cracking nuts or bones for marrow, in a landscape that was wooded lakeshore, not open plain. And the implication reaches into who we are. Complex hands and complex tasks may have driven the growth of the brain, rather than waiting for it. The oldest technology on Earth was invented by something that was not yet human. The toolmaker came before the human. We are the tool's descendants, not its inventor. And some of the strangest finds are not old at all, but frozen in a single moment. Number 8. The St. Bélec Slab. In 2014, in the cellar of a French museum, researchers brushed the dust off a slab of stone that had been lost since 1900 and realized the faint scratches covering it were a map. The oldest map of a territory in all of Europe, forgotten twice. The slab is large and heavy, a piece of gray schist about 2.2 meters long, 1.5 meters wide, and weighing close to a ton. It was first discovered in 1900 by an archaeologist named Paul du Châtelier, who found it forming part of a Bronze Age burial box, a stone cist, at a site called Saint Bélec in Brittany. He studied it briefly, and then it slipped out of memory, stored in a chateau cellar, and later in museum storage, effectively lost for over a century. It was rediscovered in 2014 in the cellar of the National Archaeology Museum near Paris by a group of researchers including Clément Nicolas and Yvon Paillet. And when they looked closely at the engraved lines, the cup marks, and the geometric motifs, they saw a coherent pattern. In a study published in 2021, they concluded it was a topographic map. The engraving dates to the early Bronze Age, roughly 2,150 to 1,600 years before the Common Era, about 4,000 years old. It appears to depict a real region of the Odette River Valley in Brittany, an area of roughly 30 kilometers by 21 kilometers, at a scale near 1 to 13,000. When the team compared the engraved lines to the actual river network of the region, they found a correlation of about 80%. Raised and carved elements seem to represent hills, valleys, and river courses, a rough three-dimensional relief of the land. Repeated motifs, connected by lines, may mark territories, settlements, or land holdings. That has led to a striking interpretation. This may be a political map, a claim of control over a piece of land. And there is a haunting detail in how it ended. The slab was broken and reused as a wall of that burial cyst. Some researchers suggest this was a deliberate act, the symbolic killing of the map and of the power it represented when that Bronze Age society collapsed. Rediscovering it meant detective work, matching the old 1900 excavation drawings to the misplaced stone. Reading it meant modern technology, three-dimensional scanning and photogrammetry to bring out engravings too faint for the eye. Whatever its exact purpose, the slab shows something profound. 4,000 years ago, someone stood on those hills and drew their entire world to scale. An act of abstract thinking that is the direct ancestor of every map ever made since. And then, that world was lost, once in the ground and once in a basement. Some finds are contested, not because they are old, but because no one can agree what they even are. Number 9. The Divje Babe Flute. In a cave in Slovenia in 1995, a team lifted a fragment of bear bone out of the sediment and saw two clean, round holes lined up along the shaft. Depending on who you ask, they had just found the oldest musical instrument on Earth, or the leftovers of a hyena's meal. 30 years later, the argument is still not settled. The object is part of the thigh bone of a young cave bear, a species called Ursus spelaeus. It has two complete holes and two possible partial ones, aligned in a row. It was found by the archaeologist Ivan Turk and his team at the site of Divje Babe 1, near the town of Crkno in western Slovenia. The layer it came from is dated to roughly 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, in the Middle Paleolithic, when this land belonged to Neanderthals. If those holes were made on purpose, this bone is a flute, and a candidate for the oldest known musical instrument in the world. The holes are roughly circular, and spaced in a way that some argue could produce the notes of a musical scale. But everything hinges on how the holes were made, and here, two camps read the exact same bone in completely opposite ways. On one side, skeptics, including the respected researchers Francesco D'Errico and April Nowell, argue the holes are simply bite marks. A carnivore, a hyena, or a wolf punched through the soft bone of a young bear with its teeth. They point out that cave bear thigh bones are extremely common objects for carnivores to chew, and that similar holes appear on bones we know were gnawed. On the other side, Ivan Turk and his supporters argue the holes are too round, too aligned, and too clean to be bite marks. A carnivore's bite tends to crush and splinter, and they say this bone lacks that damage. The musicologist Bob Fink even argued the spacing matches a diatonic scale, though that claim is disputed. The fight has played out in the peer-reviewed literature for decades, with the researcher Caius Diedrich pressing the carnivore case and Turk answering back. People have built playable replicas of the bone, and they can produce several notes across more than an octave. A Slovenian musician named Ljuban Dimkarovski reconstructed one and performed on it. The original is treated as a national treasure and displayed in the National Museum of Slovenia. The dating used electron spin resonance and radiocarbon on associated material. And the stakes are genuinely large. If this is a flute, then music predates our species. Another kind of human-made melody before we ever existed. If it is only a chewed bone, it shows how deeply we want that to be true. This single object forces one of the biggest questions in archaeology, and the fact that we still cannot answer it is the point. But the strangest find of all is not the oldest. It is the one that recorded a single day. Number 10, the Tanis Site. 66 million years ago, in what is now North Dakota, fish thrashed in a river as tiny beads of molten glass rained down into their gills, and a wall of water buried them alive, all within minutes. This site may be a fossil snapshot of the single worst afternoon in the history of life, the day the dinosaurs died. The place is called Tanis, part of the famous Hell Creek Formation in southwestern North Dakota. It has been studied and heavily publicized by the paleontologist Robert De Palma, whose landmark paper appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2019. The interpretation is staggering. Tanis appears to record sediment laid down within minutes to hours of the Chicxulub asteroid impact. That asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, about 3,000 kilometers away, and yet Tanis seems to capture its effects almost instantly. Fossil fish, paddlefish, and sturgeon were found with tiny spherules of impact debris lodged in their gills. These are droplets of melted rock, flung into the sky by the impact, that fell back to Earth and were breathed in by fish in their final moments. Some of these spherules were even caught in amber, in fossilized tree resin, which preserved their glassy chemistry unaltered. The wall of water is the strangest part. It was probably not a tsunami, because a tsunami from the Yucatan would have taken many hours to arrive. Instead, it is interpreted as a seiche, a violent sloshing of standing water, triggered by the seismic shaking of the impact, arriving in perhaps 10 to 15 minutes. That surge threw fresh water and marine creatures together into one chaotic, buried jumble. The details kept coming. In 2021, a study led by Melanie During, published in Nature, argued from the growth lines in the fish bones that the impact happened in the northern hemisphere, spring. The site holds fish, plants, ammonites, mammal burrows, and even a fossilized impression of Triceratops' skin. A claimed fossil leg of a dinosaur called Thescelosaurus, argued to be an animal killed on the day itself, was featured in a 2022 documentary narrated by David Attenborough. The evidence ties directly to the global catastrophe. The spherules were chemically matched to the Chicxulub impact, and the deposit is capped by the iridium-rich boundary clay that marks the end of the Cretaceous all over the world. Now, the honest caution. The fossils are astonishing, but some of De Palma's boldest claims have drawn scrutiny over methods and unpublished detail, so the science tends to split between trust in the deposit and questions about its storyteller. Yet Melanie During reached a similar spring timing conclusion using her own independent data, which lends real support. As a small piece of trivia, De Palma borrowed the name Tanis from the fictional city in Raiders of the Lost Ark. If the readings hold up, Tanis is the most time-precise fossil deposit ever found. Most fossils blur together deep time. This one claims to record an afternoon. It is the closest science has ever come to a photograph of the day the age of dinosaurs ended, buried in the ground, and waiting to be read. 10 finds, and one thread runs through all of them. The truth keeps outrunning invention. Look back across all 10, and a single pattern emerges. Every one of these finds sounded fabricated, and every one of them is documented, peer-reviewed, and real. There are really only 3 reasons they sound fake. They are too old, too precise, or too deliberate for the world we expected. The Lomekwi tools, the Trinil engraving, the Berekhat Ram Pebble, all show behavior arriving before the species that was supposed to invent it. Oklo's self-regulating reactor, the minute-by-minute record at Tanis, and the scaled map of St. Bélec are all too precise, too exact, to feel natural. And Bruniquel's rings and Makapansgat's carried face show deliberate intent in places and times where we assumed there was none. Why is our first instinct to disbelieve? Because our timelines are built largely on the absence of evidence. We assume a thing did not happen until we find proof, and each of these finds is a new piece of proof that forces the story to change. That is uncomfortable, but it is how the record grows. New methods keep cracking these cases open. Uranium-thorium dating unlocked Bruniquel. Argon-argon dating pinned down Lomekwi and Trinil. Isotope growth lines dated the season at Tanis. Photogrammetry read the map at St. Bélec, and trapped xenon revealed the rhythm at Oklo. And two of these treasures, the Trinil shell and the St. Bélec slab, were found twice, once in the ground and once, decades later, in a forgotten museum drawer. Even the contested cases matter. The Baigong pipes, the Divje babe bone, parts of the Tanis story, the Berekhat Ram grooves. These are not failures. They are science working in real time, in public, argument by argument. The fringe reads every mystery as aliens or lost technology. The record reads them as something better, an Earth stranger than we assumed, and ancestors older and smarter than we gave them credit for. The lesson is not that the past is fake. It is that our picture of it is always too small and always being corrected upward. So what is left unanswered? A great deal, and that is the best part. We still do not know what the Bruniquel rings were for. There is no household debris to tell us whether they were ritual, refuge, or something with no modern word. We still cannot settle whether the Divje babe bone is a flute or a bite mark, a true stalemate between serious researchers. We do not know whether the Makapansgat Pebble and the Berekhat Ram Figurine reflect simple curiosity or the first faint stirrings of a symbolic mind. The Baigong pipes are fully explained by geology, and yet the legend refuses to die, which tells us something about our own hunger for mystery. And at Tanis, much remains unpublished, waiting for independent teams to test the boldest claims. The pattern underneath all of it is the same. Every answer pushes some human or natural capability further back in time than we were comfortable with. Every single one of these was, at first, too strange to be real, and then it turned out to be real. That is the reason to keep looking. The next discovery is sitting in a museum drawer, or waiting past a wrong turn near a dry lake, or melting out of a thawing cave right now. The strangest thing about the deep past is not that it sounds unbelievable. It is that it keeps turning out to be true. If the deep past still has questions for you, there's another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.